Welcome to the very first episode of Animator Tech. This is your host, Terry Kalinich, and I thought it would be appropriate to dedicate this episode as an introduction to the purpose of the podcast and a little bit of an autobiography, in essence, me interviewing myself. But before I get on to the specifics of some details about my life related to animation and technical things in that industry, I think it would be a good idea for me to explain why am I doing this in the first place. I think in general, I have come across many different unique experiences. I've crossed paths with many unique individuals. I've had a lot of great experiences, some not so great, but all of them worth talking about. I believe it's often overlooked when you come across a negative experience that to not talk about it seems to be the go-to experience that most of us want to gravitate to. I think there's something always to learn from a negative experience, both in a lesson from yourself and in terms of how you can deal with those situations. But without going much further, I'll just give you a brief overview of what I intend this podcast to cover over the hopeful years that I will continue this podcast, as long as I see that there's a viewership that is showing interest and therefore giving them value in return. That's a big thing I am beginning to have a greater need in my life to do, and that is to offer advice for certain things that I've come across and experienced that I feel are valuable and should be passed along. And you can take what you will, and hopefully it'll help you in your career as an animator or related job. So for this podcast, what you'll be hearing in the future is interviews of people I have worked with and the details about that, what they do, their future goals, and perhaps some of the individuals I have worked with have gone on to create their own animation schools. So I will be more than willing to help them promote that school, if you know, or maybe it's a new company they started or something like that. But we'll be definitely talking about work experiences, things we have encountered together as co-workers, and other experiences that we have not personally experienced together. So I would definitely, I am curious as well to find out more information about the people I have worked with and what they have done outside of the personal experience I've had with them. So it's a benefit for me, it's a benefit for everyone. The other things we'll be covering in this podcast is discuss difficult topics in the workplace. By no means will this ever go into political subject matter. I'm going to keep that completely out of this podcast altogether. I believe it has no place here. So that should eliminate any unnecessary conflicts, as this podcast is focusing on your career as an animator and how to grow within that career. But the difficult topics are more to do with, dealing with someone who's a challenge to you, whether it's in a communication level or perhaps you have a hard time dealing with feedback and you'd like to share an experience that you've learned something from, perhaps, or from my guest, that is. So that I believe that's very valuable to talk about. Um, this is a subject that will often cross over in many other industries, and that is the work-life balance. What where do you value your personal social life um, versus your work life? Now, this answer can be very, very different depending on who you talk to, what point you are in your career, and your personal goals. So this answer to that question is not going to be the same for each guest that I have. So this will be very interesting to talk about as well. And last but not least, I mean there will be other subjects, but in summary, last but not least, working with a disability or with someone who has a disability. This is a subject I have not heard anyone talk about, and it's a um, very touching subject. And you may be surprised with some of the things that I will tell you based on my experience. Um, for for most of my life in my career, I've had a disability that did not affect my day-to-day work life. So, in essence, it was almost invisible to me. Up until perhaps 5 years ago, that invisible disability became slightly less invisible. And over time, it has forced me to think a little more on my perspective in my career and in my personal life. This is a subject matter that, of course, is going to be different depending on who you talk to. But my disability, I would say, has partially inspired me to do something like this podcast. I believe that there's always something to be learned from someone else's experience, so I have an eagerness to share my personal views and input on working with a disability that slowly and, of course, not voluntarily, it tries to interfere with your life. In my case in particular, my disability relates to my vision. Now, you'll probably say to yourself, how can you be an animator if your vision is impaired? And therein lies much further discussion as to what level that impairment applies. And even to this day, I can say confidently that it is not at a very intense level. However, it does dip its claws in at certain moments, more often than not, in social atmospheres around your coworkers. So I can get into that later, and that can be something that will most likely come up anyway within other guests that I talk to. But that's just a brief summary of 4 or 5 points that this podcast will be covering within the animation industry. Now, I guess I should follow with a brief autobiography here about my life as an animator, as a career choice that I made. I would say that when I was in mid grade high school, I think it was grade 11. This was the last time we had grade 13 as a high school year. But in grade 11, I saw a specific movie that will and has forever changed my life. That movie is none other than The Lion King. This, of course, is the original film drawn traditionally, and it was released in 1994. I was 15 or 16 years old at that time, and I can tell you, when I saw just the first 2 seconds of that film, it told me exactly what I should be doing with my life. I'm very grateful that I received such a assertive answer to that question that we all have. What do we do? What is our life fulfillment or destiny? Or what are the goals we want to achieve within our lifetime? And that was answered for me at that moment. So I was already artistic, so I had some artistic ability. It certainly wasn't honed or focused on very significantly, but I always had an ability to draw. But once that movie entered into my life, I basically said to myself, that's it. I gotta start drawing, and I gotta draw a lot. So basically, I started drawing every single day for at minimum 2 hours to 5 hours a day. I basically told myself, as I was getting better and I was improving and filling up sketchbooks and looking back at the older sketchbooks and saying, wow, okay, yes, things are moving. I'm starting to understand this path. When I saw that I was improving, I basically said to myself, this is it. This is my direction, and no one is going to stop me from making this happen. That's how sure I was. I knew that for me, in my life, it was animation or nothing. Now, I can say that when you have that kind of answer for yourself, it's dangerous, and you have to be careful that there is still a chance that your goals may not be met the way that you wish for them to be met. So I would say, if I were an old man talking to a young child about their goal in life, if they had such a thought that young, I would say to them, go after it. Go with all of your effort and your heart. But understand that if it's this career you're looking for, that it will fulfill your life, but not forever. Your career is not going to be there near the end of your lifetime. So have an understanding that although it can bring you a lot of joy, it will not give you joy for the latter years of your life when you become less and less capable. So try to think of that with a little bit of perspective. It's very hard to do when you're young, of course. But I'm in my barely middle age here now. But I think it's something to at least mention. So in case you don't reach that goal that you thought you would reach, it is not the end of the world. There are options that are alternatives, and on top of that, your social life has value. So the career is not everything, and therefore just remember there's always that, I would argue, ultimately that more important social side in your ability to have a family or family members that you can always talk to, because there are going to be days where things don't go your way. And it's good to have that structure and for others to talk to when times get rough, and they will. Especially in your career, it is not going to be a one-way street to the golden streets of success. That I can guarantee you. I think with my young life, as I was starting off drawing every day, I was using art as a way to escape from the stressful side of life. I won't get into this too much, but as a younger sibling with three other brothers, although two of them were more closer to my age, we had a lot of conflict within the family that was not helpful to our growth as children and young adults. But I did find that drawing was a great way to relieve stress. So it even had an emotional encouragement for me, which made me want to draw more, because it felt great that at least I wasn't thinking about the things that really didn't matter, and I didn't stress and focus on the meaningless conflicts that happened through my youth. So that is something that can happen for a lot of you out there. I'm sure we all have our conflicts, and sometimes it's unfortunately within the family. So sometimes you can use your training in your art as a way of relieving some stress. And I'm sure we find ways to do that, unfortunately, sometimes in destructive ways, such as drugs or things of that sort. I did not ever enter that realm, so I'm very grateful for that. But I would say if you can find the beginning stages of your career path as something of a stress reliever, that is a very good indicator that you have chosen the right path. Because if you have joy in the progress of your, well, let's just call it training, at least in my case, because I was learning to draw better, and I enjoyed every second of it, well, that certainly did not consider in the category of a chore or something that was tedious. It was pure enjoyment. So find something that you love doing in your career. We all basically need a career. It's just a matter of how long we need that career for. That answer can only be answered by each individual and at different times, or at a different length within their life. I also was quite a self-motivated individual. I also had, at age 13 or 14, with my twin brother, we opened up, with a friend as well as a partner, we had a computer company that we decided to build and sell our own PCs. That was a very bold thing for us to do. I think we were itching for some personal project in our lives, and we had a great match with our friend Sandy, and we had a great few years of experiences, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. That was well worth it. Although, in an animation perspective, that career path was not going to help me as an artist. I soon realized that about 3 years in, even though we were doing relatively good as a business, we weren't able to sustain a rent-worthy income, but we weren't living on our own at that point anyway, so it didn't matter. But I looked at the experiences I was having within this computer business, and I said to myself, well, I'm spending all this time on the computer business, and really I should be focusing more on my art and my path as an animator. So I basically called it quits on the business, and at that point I was already near the end of high school, and I was all in for animation. And so that is the moment where there was no other distractions for me, and it was strictly a focus on one thing, and I liked it that way. And yes, I was steamrolling forward very fast. I think I'll end that part of my autobiography right here, because I don't want to make the podcast too long, especially because it's the first one. I do want to give you a sense of the kind of things we would be discussing for future episodes with other guests. So if you do like what you have heard, I would hope you can please subscribe, like the video, and most certainly please comment. Ask me any questions you may have. If you have any suggestions, please do that as well. I will, in the future, when I get more structured, I will have moments where I will answer questions directly from the community. And in some cases, it may even be as a live stream. So as I become more adept at doing this podcast and create a proper structure, those are the things you can be looking forward to. So please, if you like this video, do so, share it, and subscribe, and of course ring that bell. You know, the old YouTube algorithms. If you want to get notified, then the bell will help you with that for future episodes. Of course, this podcast is not only for animation advice and information. I have a Maya tutorial section that I will be going into very deep details of animation related topics and rigging, and the crossover between animation and rigging, which I call animation tech. And that's basically where this podcast came from, because that's where the bulk of my experience lies. Anyway, with that said, thank you very much for taking your time to listen to this very first episode. And I hope you have a wonderful day, and we have many more fun podcasts in the future. Thanks again. Bye-bye for now.